Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to go over all of the books that I read in December. So I have them in front of me, and I also have my bullet journal. This is where I record all of the books that I read throughout each month and throughout the year. Over here I had my TBR that started at the beginning of January 2023, and so those were all the books on my physical TBR. These are all the other books that I've either read, borrowed from the library, had borrowed to me from other people, bought during the year, and audiobooks. So that's all the books from the entire year of 2023. I believe it was somewhere around the low 80s for the number of books I've read. I'll have to count. And yeah, so I feel like it was a really successful year for reading. And in December, I read 10 books, which is wild. That is a lot of reading, and I really missed reading because the September, October, November even, I didn't have much time due to work and school and all of that. But let's go through all of the books that I read in the month of December, and I'll also go through the audiobooks, and I'll pop a picture probably over on the side of audiobooks or any books that I do not have. So I tried to do these in order, so I have my physical books in order, and then I'll go through my audiobooks in order of how I listen to them. So the first book that I finished in December was Brand New Emily. This is like a middle grade book about a girl who moves to a new school, and it's not going well, so she's rebranding herself. It was kind of a cute book, definitely middle grade, and yeah, that's all I really have to say about that. The next book that I finished in December was Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. I absolutely loved this book. This book is about 600 pages long. The pages are really thin. And my cat is just making a nest on a blanket over there, so if you hear meowing in the background, that's why. This was just a really beautifully written story. I absolutely loved it. This is a book that I would probably pick up and read again in the future. So it is following a woman's journey, and it's actually like time hops. So it's following two main plot lines about two women's lives and kind of the intersection between them. And it's about flying and family and all of those different things. So it was a beautifully written story, and I would highly recommend that one. I would say this is a 5-star read for me, or at least close to 4.5. Not sure. I'm not really that great at rating books, so take it with a grain of salt. The next book that I read that has been on my TBR list for a while, and then I went to Barnes & Noble and I saw this beautiful copy and I picked it up. It is House of Earth and Blood. It's the first book in Sarah J. Maas's Crescent City series. So I picked up this one and the second book, and I will be purchasing the third book in February. It comes out at the end of January, but I'm trying not to spend money in January, so we'll pick it up in February. But this book reminded me about why I love Sarah J. Maas's writing. It just is as a writer, she's just somebody who connects with how I think and how I like to read, and it was just fantastic. So I'm really excited to read the next book in the series. You can kind of see it's on the shelf up there. I'm hoping to get to it in January, like as a bonus read along with my TBR, but we'll see. The next book that I read was The Kite Runner. This is a book that's been on my shelf for a really long time, and I finally read it. I realized I was a little bit intimidated to read it, and one of my goals for the next year is to really tackle the books that intimidate me and get them off my TBR shelf. But it was not as good as I hoped it would be, but I just read two really great books, so I just don't know if it just didn't hit the spot at the time or whatnot, but it's definitely worth a read if you haven't read it. The next book that I read was The Hour I First Believed. This is another one I was intimidated to read, I think because of the length. This book I go back and forth on, because there were some parts of it that were really well written and the storyline really connected, but then all of a sudden the next chapter would be like 30 pages on like a complete tangent on a side character that didn't seem really relevant. This book is about 700 pages long. I think it could have been conveyed in a 400-page book. I really think there's a lot of excess that makes it a little dense to read, and it was hard to connect with the characters because of that. It was definitely a different storytelling style, and I think it tackles some important issues. However, it wasn't my cup of tea. This kind of reminds me of when I read The Latecomer. It just didn't click for me, and that's okay, but now this book is going to be decluttered and no longer be on my shelf because I got it for free out of my grandma's declutter box anyway, so now it can be out of my life. And then the last physical book that I read in December, and I finished on December 31st, is They Both Die at the End. This is a book I actually picked up earlier in the month, I think after I read the first Crescent City book, and I started reading it and it just wasn't clicking for me. So I'm like, okay, I'll pick up one of my other books. This was a really great book. I loved it. It was a great read. I enjoyed the plot. It kept me on my toes a little bit. It's definitely worth a read. If you've ever read some Gabrielle Zevin books, if you've read Elsewhere, it has a very similar feel to reading that. This is a book I would probably pick up again in the future, and I'm probably gonna borrow it out to some people because I enjoyed it that much. So that is all the physical books that I read December. It is January when I'm filming this. Now let's go through my audiobooks, which I've recorded here, and I'll try to do these in the order that I listen to them. However, there's a couple in here that I'm unsure about the specific order. So the first one that I finished in December was The Girl You Left Behind. This was a story that revolved around a painting, and that's as much as I kind of want to say about it because I don't want to spoil anything. That was a pretty good book. It was by Jojo Moyes. So yeah, I thought it was pretty good. It's been on my TBR for a while, or TBR list for a while, so I got it off of that. Next one, I think was The Boy Toy, which was like a romance book. It's set in Australia, which I found really fun. And it just had like a different like vibe to a romance book, so I enjoyed that. And that was a nice short one. Then was As Bright as Heaven. That is by one of my favorite authors, Susan Messner, which is also the author of this book right there. And this story, I wasn't sure what it was about. I just knew that she wrote it, and it's one I hadn't read. So it was about the 1917 flu pandemic. Was a part of it in World War I, but it all based around a family who moved to Philadelphia to take over their uncle's funeral home. So they lived in the funeral home and they ran it, and the father was an undertaker. So it centered around, the whole story itself centered around death, and it was told in a very tactful, beautiful way, and it definitely hit home with life events of the recent years about living in a time of extreme uncertainty, and yeah, it was, again, beautifully written. Would recommend. Would probably reread that book because it, again, her writing is just something that clicks with me, and every single book that I've read of hers has been great. And then the last audiobook that I listened to in December was A Midwinter's Wedding, which is a novella, and it was the last audiobook that my library has of the Four Kingdoms series world. And so now I'm officially done with that series for as much as my library has. And yeah, so that was kind of sad because I enjoyed that world so much. So hopefully my library gets some more audiobooks on the other books that she's written in the future. But that is all of the books that I read in December. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye.